So, a very good morning to everyone. I'm Akanksha Joshi, and on behalf of Mergerware, I take this opportunity to welcome our featured panelists and audience to this exclusive webinar on the extremely relevant topic Key Steps to Successfully Define Deal Strategy and Integration. Mergerware is truly honored to have with us today some very eminent women leaders who are experts in their field and shall be reflecting on the theme of this webinar. We have Dawn Bartholomew, Global Head of Corporate Development at Spencer Stuart and Concentric, Tatyana Mosenkis, Senior Director, Corporate Development at Flex, and Rekha Devarapalli, Senior Manager, Corporate Strategy and M&A at Western Alliance Bank. We also have Dharmendra Singh, the founder and CEO of Mergerware, who will be moderating the panel. It's a privilege to have you all with us today. A very warm welcome to all of you. So, well, let's begin the day. Over to you, Dharmendra.
Thank you, Akansha. Thanks for inviting all of us. And thank you and welcome all the speakers, panel speakers. The first time we have all female speakers. So I'm very happy to moderate this panel. And we have very interesting topic of today. And I'm sure the topic, if you look at the topic, is very wide topic from strategy to deal integration. And we are going to start this. So maybe first I request everyone to maybe give a short introduction about yourself, starting from Dawn, and then we go to Tatyana.
I'm sorry, what was that?
No, you can start. You can start a short introduction. That will be helpful for our audience.
Yes, so Dawn Bartholomew, I've ran for about 10 or 15 years, corporate development, everything from deal strategy through to integration and post-close tracking, mainly in professional services, but some technology and data acquisitions as well, spanning healthcare, life sciences, and just technology consulting as well.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we request other speakers also to please go ahead and introduce yourself.
We can't quite hear you well for some reason, so I assume it's my turn. So I'm Tatyana Mosenkis, and I'm Senior Director of Corporate Development at Flex Corporation, formerly known as Flextronics. Prior to Flex, I spent time in corporate development as well with Eaton, GE, a couple of GE businesses, and majority of my time with United Technologies. So majority of my focus has been really end-to-end M&A process, from identification of targets to developing integration plans. As corporate development person, typically, personally, I'm not responsible for the integration. We typically hand over integration to the integration team after the deal is closed.
Yeah, thank you. Rekha, you can go ahead now.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. I'm Rekha Devarapalli, Senior Manager of Corporate Strategy and M&A at Western Alliance Bank. Prior to this, I was with Deloitte in their M&A practice, helping technology companies. I'm looking forward to the discussion today. I'm pretty excited about it.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks all of you. So now I know I have list of questions, and I'm sure that this is going to be very interesting discussion because the topic is so interesting. Starting from a strategy to deal integration. So I think both how we can link, what are the key elements of it. So maybe I'll start with my first questions, and you can, I go to Rekha first, maybe for my first question, and then we move to other panelists. So what we have thought is, most of the time we have seen that there are different key points of consideration for, defining the deal strategy. And I wanted to know what are those key points of consideration while you're defining your deal strategy, and what are some of the rationale behind key M&A decisions?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, happy to discuss. So I believe that the deal strategy should very closely align with the corporate strategy of the company. And by that, I mean, if like all the executives need to discuss on a regular basis what the strengths, weaknesses, and of the company, and then try to identify the growth areas and the opportunities for the company. And I think once you identify those areas, then look for targets in that areas. I mean, this kind of seems obvious, but I've seen and heard from my peers, a lot of companies just doing M&A deals just because something is available for the cheap, or because some deal was brought to them by the bankers, and then try to fit into the company instead of going first with the strategy and then trying to identify targets based on your company's strengths and weaknesses. So typically you look at, once you analyze, kind of do a SWOT analysis of your company, then you look at whether you want to do a horizontal integration, meaning peer companies or competitors, or a vertical integration, which is suppliers or customers, or even a diagonal integration, which is new products and markets. So this is how like general corporate strategy discussions go. And then you try to identify the targets based on this strategy. So I think, so maybe I'll just pause here to see if other panelists want to add something, and then we can continue forward.
Sure. So maybe we go to Dawn.
Sure. Yeah, very similar. We are always looking at, do we want to expand our core, maybe by new geographies? And in those situations, we're much more looking at a full integration, or sometimes it's just a capabilities or solution expansion where it's a little bit further away from the core, maybe some new business models, where we try to tie in the key parts, whether it be the clients or the back-end systems, or even technologies. And then there's situations at both my prior company, Huron, and my current company, Spencer Stuart, where we've done kind of launched into new areas. So we're setting up something that's kind of like fully standalone out there, and it's only got maybe some dotted lines back to the parent company.
Okay, good. So maybe we hear some points from Tatyana. You have some points to add?
Well, I would say it's very similar, right? I mean, like majority, I guess, of companies that I've been with are typically first looking on identifying the strategy and trying to understand what are the gaps, right? So, and how to address those gaps, whether through organic or inorganic growth. And of course, we all know that R&D, especially for industrial companies, take a little bit longer than we like. So, and it's a little bit faster to address the gap by acquiring necessary capability. Also for larger established companies, it's very popular to look on new products, especially in the last 5 years, right, with digitalizations and telematics, etc. So it is a very popular trend to understand what are the capabilities on the market that can quickly address the needs of the customers. Also those needs are identified through the strategy. And consequently, the pipeline is built based on those identifying the gaps, identifying the customer needs, and consequently identifying a pipeline of the target companies that may fulfill both of these points.
Okay, very good point. So, just because I know that you work primarily on, pre-deal side, and then you do the handover to integration. And my question to you is, do you agree that, if you have a very right, dealer strategy and very good integration approach, that has an impact on the deal success?
Yeah, I believe that's directed to me, Dharmendra. Yes, so yeah, definitely. I think previously it was the pre-deal and the closing of the deal, due diligence is handled by a team and integration is handled by a separate team. But there are definitely risks in that approach, right? Because a lot of the success of the M&A depends on being able to achieve the synergies that were identified during the deal strategy and the kind of the rationale for the whole deal. So it is very important that those are not lost in translation between different teams. So it would be ideal to have a core team that is involved in both due diligence, valuation, closing, as well as integration. But that is typically possible in companies which does have teams specific to M&A. But if a company doesn't do a lot of deals, then you're just putting together teams on the fly to do the due diligence. And then there's another team that is either externally brought in for integration. And there is a risk definitely involved in that case, especially if there is, if the idea is to have a full integration in which there are a lot of cost savings to be achieved or revenue synergies to be achieved. If it is only kind of going to be separately managed, probably it's not as much of a risk. But depending on the level of integration, that does definitely have its own risks. And it's ideal to have a team that flows continuously throughout the M&A process.
Right. So in your opinion, I think I have, maybe not additional question, just to give, get your view. So how you define this as integration approach? Like, you might be involved in several type of deal, right? So when you have to take a decision, you are going for full integration or maybe partial integration. What is your key thing you decide? How you decide that?
Right. Yeah, that's definitely a great question. So I think, again, it goes back to what are the opportunity areas that we identified. So again, if it's a horizontal integration, meaning you're acquiring a competitor where there is an overlap of products or markets, the best benefit would be to kind of consolidate. And so you would need a lot of integration in operations and in the back end to kind of achieve those cost synergies that you're expecting. Whereas if it is more a vertical integration where you are acquiring a supplier or customer, probably there is not much of an overlap between your products and services and theirs. And the integration accordingly, you can manage. It may not be a full integration, maybe just integration of some backend, maybe HR, finance, but then the rest of the teams operate separately. So yeah, it depends on, I think, what we are trying to get out of that particular deal. So it would ideally be decided at the very beginning when you decide the deal strategy, the kind of integration or the extent and the level of or depth of integration that needs to be done to achieve the synergies that we are expecting.
Right.
And again, another point, if I may add, is really what type of company you're acquiring, right? So if, let's say, a large company acquires a smaller technology company that grew because of their entrepreneurial spirit, they're nimble, they can do things fast, they're able to make decisions fast. It's very, very important to preserve this entrepreneurial spirit, not to kill the company, like the very reason why you are acquiring a company for. So a decision, obviously, like in such situation can be made sort of like to leave this company alone, right? So, and you may do a little bit of a back office integration and mainly focusing that, okay, right, like let's adjust our benefits, right? Or like perhaps provide some corporate support for the systems and things like that. But the core team that basically presents an asset needs to be left alone in order to be able to operate the same way why they were successful to begin with, right? So if it is a more established company with similar product lines and perhaps like similar markets, right? So the approach certainly can be different. But I guess maybe because I come with industrial background, in the last 5-6 years, I've seen a number of deals that were done in technology space, in high-tech space. And there seems to be, I guess the term now is hybrid integration, right? So this hybrid integration seems to be a very common approach most recently to help with preserving the spirit, the entrepreneurial spirit of the original company.
Yeah, great. Preserving the culture of if that is what is the main rationale for acquisition, yeah, definitely.
Don,
yeah, and
some point.
Well, working in professional services, the people are the business, and I think when we think of when we think of it, we think of the strategy, we think of the priorities and work very closely with the business leaders and the business sponsor of what they're hoping to drive from it. From a timeline and milestone perspective, in my experience, and we've done much smaller deals, which is a little bit riskier because it's very easy for that to disintegrate if you don't do it correctly. But we start first with kind of the leadership and clients. They seem to give you the clients will give you the least amount of time to figure things out once the deal's announced. Employees, you probably have a year. So if you can closely monitor, you can kind of keep things back on track. And then systems, even though it like drives a lot of the synergies and it's kind of like what everyone's thinking about, unless it's related to benefits or some things in the US that you are required to change, we kind of like make sure we do those on a more timely basis or at the back end. So it's supportive, but we don't let that drive at the front end. And that's actually from a lot of lessons learned when we used to come in, day one with laptops and all kinds of expense training and things that were not really received well by the companies we acquired.
Yeah. Any other point from anyone? Because I have, next question is linked to this. So my question to you is, who are the key influencer of, part of dealer strategy or integration of buyouts? So who are the key influencers for, your dealer strategy? Who are the primary key stakeholder?
Yeah, from what I have seen, it's usually like the executives led by the CEO, CFO, and that particular division head in whose division the acquisition is going to sit in are usually like the key players on one side of the merger or acquisition, and similarly on the other side as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd say similarly. When you're sourcing the deal, you're kind of bringing that business sponsor with you to kind of meet with the companies and do the evaluation. They're a key stakeholder moving ahead. I think then kind of like mapping up, depending on the transaction, whether if it's professional services, your head of HR obviously is very key. If it's technology, your CIO or your product strategy person is a very key person to have. But making sure there's kind of representation and you're partnering them up on both sides so it doesn't seem too intrusive has been the way I've approached it.
Yeah, Tatyana?
And I guess stakeholders, right? Like can be even broader, right? So like depends on where you sit in the organization. So I guess if it is a larger deal and it's a public company, right? So even so, we don't necessarily think about it when we look on the deal at the beginning, but ultimately even shareholders of the company are stakeholders as well, right? Because we always need to take into account, okay, how the market will react if such deal is announced, right? Whether the market would think it's a good move, bad move, indifferent, right? So like that also can be a consideration. So your competitors can be a consideration as well. So we also need to take into account, so okay, fine, how our competitors would react to such move and how would they see the implications and even regulators, right? Like I've been a part of the analysis when we would pass on the deal because we felt that, okay, right, like if we go ahead and we acquire or like start work on the deal, and as all of you guys know, like any like deal is expensive. Not only you have to pay for the purchase price, right, but you also have advisors and legal advisors and financial advisors, and you are tying up your resources. So like before even like engaging into the whole deal exercise, like you really want to understand your chances of getting the deal done. And if a legal team does their analysis and says, well, you know what, like for whatever reason, we may have a problem, like in a country with very tight regulation requirements that this deal may not pass through. So unexpectedly, regulators become in a way your stakeholders because we need to consider what the reaction would be and whether we're able to get this deal through. right? So certainly customers are also stakeholders, because a lot of deals are done to meet the needs of the customers or the expectations of the customers. So yes, there are external and internal stakeholders, and somehow I guess we are always very mindful of internal stakeholders, because those are the people that we see every day and we interact every day, right? But there is a huge circle of external stakeholders that also need to be considered as we develop a deal strategy, or as we call it these days, investment theses, right? So like as we prepare investment theses, so that all of this larger external circle also needs to be considered.
Yeah, thanks, Tatyana, for your time. It's very thoughtful question, because most of the time, internal stakeholders, of course, they meet every day, but there are, the executive sponsor, maybe the people who are initial part of deal process, if they have participated and they have been meeting internal team, that's very important. So I have another, question to you is, how you spot the best M&A opportunity for you? So I know you all have different experience and different type of deal, but how you spot the best M&A opportunities? Maybe you can share some of your experience, that what are the way, how you decided that this should be the best opportunity for you to go ahead?
From my perspective, you really have to start with the investment thesis on, where the market's going, what you need to get there. And then it's really sourcing the deals yourself. I agree that just waiting for a banker to send you a book is not a good strategy, because in that process, you not only are kind of comparing what's in the market, but you're learning a lot, especially if you're entering a new area or a new industry. So really meeting with the different teams, taking back those learnings as you start to kind of refine that investment thesis, and then using that to kind of drive it is probably is a practice that I've always tried to use working with the business sponsor.
Rekha, any other additional points from it?
Yeah, no, I think Don covered it, but one thing I would add, I think in case of especially technology companies, wherein there are a lot of new technologies being developed all across the world, especially in Europe, Israel, it is very important to be active in that tech community, to be aware of the latest developments and technology, if that is what your acquisition focus is on. So sourcing those kind of deals is a bit both tricky and interesting at the same time.
Yeah. Tatyana, any other points you have?
Well, I don't think I have any additional points. I mean, I completely agree that as we develop the strategy, we kind of trying to understand the universe of companies, right? So that can help us to address whether the gaps that we have or the needs that we are trying to address. And I completely agree with Rekha. So it's very important to be plugged in, sort of in the community, right, or into the space. So previously, obviously, before COVID, it was very helpful to go to different industry events, different industry shows, right? So we obviously tried to do it best as we could over Zoom, not necessarily the same experience, but nevertheless, so it's very helpful and very useful, and certainly it's an opportunity to learn. And it's an opportunity to meet people, exchange thoughts, exchange ideas, and to understand very different, especially tech companies are. But even industrial companies are basically let's say Honeywell, right? It's a big industrial company which completely reinvented itself, and it's a great example of how old became new, right? So these guys are very much plugged in, I know, into all of the Silicon Valley developments and any other pockets around the world where technology gets developed, and they always kind of scouting the landscape and trying to understand what is emerging at what stage, and where this development is going. And certainly what would be a good time, like what would be the right timing to pick this company up, especially if we speak about high-tech type of opportunities.
Yeah, building on what Tatyana just said, actually, I just heard an interesting statistic of private equity. I think TA Associates did a study of all their portfolio companies and the returns on it. And the most correlated was how long they knew the company. So actually building those relationships with the potential companies early on and keeping that going is a good way to be in the ecosystem and know what the best opportunities are and make sure that you make the right selection as a partner.
Yeah, that's a great point. Add on to that, to what Don just said. I know a lot of tech companies are starting a venture fund or a division of their own to just start investing in all the latest startups. Yeah. Start with maybe like a 5%, 10% before they decide on whether to acquire it completely. So yeah, that's a trend that's been quite popular as well.
Yeah. I think most of the large enterprises I have seen, they have their VC firm separately, and they keep investing in such venture, nurture them for a few years before they take the decision to acquire. Yeah. So this is the latest trend in almost all the big large companies. They're starting from Honeywell, Schneider Electric, even Airbus. They have their Airbus ventures, and they are doing the same.
Yes. Yeah. Very true. Very true. Yeah.
Okay, so now I have my next question. So primarily, if you look at all the transaction happens and up to deal is closed, signed and closed, there is lots of celebration. But as soon as deal is have to be transitioned to, your integration team, always we see a big challenges. I have seen in my several deals, we have big challenge of managing this transition. So in your opinion, what are the key challenges you find, and generally what are some of the best practices which works well for the deal success? Because deal have to be integrated. To integrate the deal, we need to have the successful transition. And I want to learn more from you. What are the best practices? What challenges you have seen in your deal, and how you manage well? Anyone can take.
Yeah, there are definitely several challenges there, Midra, but maybe I'll focus on a couple of them. One is like the quick decision making, the ability to quickly decide on what the new org structure will be, who is going to lead what, and making those decisions and communicating them clearly is, I think, is a key. Otherwise, there will be a lot of people that might be leaving the companies because of the uncertainty involved, right? So while until closing, a lot of the M&A deals are about the financials. Does it make sense financially? But the integration is a lot about people, right? So it is very important to bring that a little bit of certainty as soon as possible and communicate the new org structure and who is going to lead what, and kind of take those decisions jointly, depending upon the strengths of each side's leaders and businesses. And the second one, again, culture. I know the word culture means different things to different people, but it is important to define what it is that you're trying to preserve. Is it the kind of decision making is what is the strength of your company, and is that what you're trying to preserve? Trying to nail down into 2 or 3 points that that are easy to communicate, right? Because what the executives think and what the rest of the company thinks probably may not always align. So to be able to easily communicate, okay, so we are all going to be one sales force now going forward, or we're all going to be like one team, one client-facing team, on things like that, so that it's easily understandable what the strategy is. Because building strategy is one thing, but being able to communicate to the larger organization is a key. So definitely being able to make decisions quickly, communicating effectively, and then sticking to the timelines. So the faster, the better always, so as to not disrupt the existing business. So trying to set 30-day, 60-day, 90-day, or 100-day timelines and identifying the priorities that needs to be accomplished between those, like Don was mentioning earlier. Is it the expense training that needs to go first, or is it the synergy, or is it the technology training or the sales training, etc.? Need to identify those priorities.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think communication is probably the number one thing. Expectations, managing the expectations both for clients and employees is absolutely critical. And then the second thing is just kind of like the data tracking. So when you do a deal, really being kind of maniacal about the data, and is it, are trends that you're seeing or deviations from expectations and all the work you did during diligence, are those a signs of something that you miss? Because there's always those little things you miss. You can't capture everything about an organization. You find out it's, sometimes a change in the snacks, has the team up in arms, or signage or things like that. It's amazing, the little things that can really take up a lot of time, a management time, an employee time, and be construed different ways. So making sure that you're doing the engagement surveys, you're doing all of kind of like the data tracking to make sure that all your plans were the right ones. And if you need to tweak them, it's usually the little things that kind of blow up.
Right. Yeah, like I completely agree with all of the points, and communication, and I guess frequent communication, right? So, sometimes we find ourselves in a situation where we really focus on day one, and we make a big communication blitz on day one, and it's a big event, it's a big celebration, right? And there is a lot going on, but then kind of like communication fades away. So it's also very important to keep in mind that beyond day one, it's a new environment for the acquired entity, and there's a lot of change going on, even like little things, right? So maybe different, or the requirements may be different, especially when, let's say, a privately held company acquired by a public company. And let's say now the reporting requirements are different, right? So, I don't know, EH&S requirements are different, or many different other requirements can be different, or approval processes are different, escalation routes are different. So to keep this communication going and over communicating is very, very helpful to, again, like to preserve the culture and to help with adjustment to a new culture. And what I think is helpful really is to start integration early, especially if there is, or integration planning early, especially if there is time between signing and closing. So it's important to start this planning and use this time together with the acquired entity, so that the acquired entity and the acquired team understands that integration is not happening to them, right? It's happening with them, and they are a party to this change. So that both teams can finally meet and discuss, okay, like this is how we do it, this is how like we do it, right? And understand what needs to change and what is the less painful way to introduce and adapt those changes.
Yeah. So I think, just, one more point here I would like to add. So as we talked about lending organization, communicating people, communicating on time. So I think I have seen that as soon as lending organization is done, this is level 1, but always there is a problem of people go to N-1, N-2 and below. People who are in middle management, people who are, soft floor, who are working in R&D. Many times I have seen they are not being communicated, or many times they miss information. So what are something you advise, or you might have, followed something in your deal, which works very well to communicate to employees who are not on N and N-1, but people below. Because they are one who many times they are not being communicated well. So I think how you address those.
Yeah, one thing that I have seen being successful is having town halls with the HR, town halls with the executives, town halls with leadership. So I think giving that opportunity for employees to ask questions, to get answers, understand the strategy and understand what that means to them. I think town halls are a good way to address some of those.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think the town halls and actually kind of the C-suite of the acquiring company too, making an effort to make those connections with those people it's just kind of critical. Another thing is if you can't, depending on the size and the dispersity of the organization, if you can't bring everyone together, also making sure that you've got the right kind of buddy system with the leadership teams, so that they feel like they've got a connection into the company, back to the new parent company, so that they can kind of also use their chains of communication and command to kind of filter down good news and good feelings about the transaction.
Yeah. Any other point to add, Tatyana, you have any other point to add?
Well, I think we covered pretty much everything. So, like, I guess, like, town halls are certainly is the best approach, and especially if there are multiple locations, it's important to make an effort to send your deal sponsors and executives into those multiple locations. And now, again, with the use of technology, we can certainly use like Zoom meetings, right, to plug everyone in, and webcam all of those meetings into locations where perhaps, right, like if there are multiple locations, people cannot be at once everywhere. So, but still, it's important certainly to address the entire employee's body. And again, like as I said previously, not only to focus on day one, but continue with the town halls, even more, maybe more frequently at the beginning, that a company does their own regular town halls, right? So like typically we are now experiencing, let's say, like town halls maybe like once a quarter, right? When our management communicates to the employees what's going on, right? Like what are the results, what are the goals, etc. So perhaps at the beginning, it could be considered to have such town halls with an acquired entity, maybe even once a month, right? Or whatever the cadence may work for this acquired entity, so that that the acquired entity feels like they're fully plugged in and they fully understand what's going on and what will happen, and how to navigate this new environment, right? So I guess the important point here is, I remember like years ago, I was part of the workshop conducted by McKinsey, and they used this term "two in the box" for integration, right? So I think that the important point is this idea of two in the box, that integration is not happening to the company, but it's happening with the company, right? So that an acquired entity is part of the decision making and is part of the planning and fully understands the reasons and rationales for the decision and what's going to be next, right? And what's going to be the next change. So that goes a long way.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just to add one thing, Dharmendra, like Tatyana mentioned before, utilizing the time between the signing and closing is very critical. And like Don was saying, I think that would be the best time to form the buddy system between the acquirer and the acquiree. I think, but in some cases, due to either regulatory constraints, where our antitrust issues, where the companies cannot share a lot of data during that time, I've seen teams utilize a third party or some called clean teams that come in, that can review the data from both the parties and still come up with an integration plan so as to not lose time when the day one comes. So yeah, that is also an alternative that could work.
Okay, thanks Rekha for this additional points. So, coming to the next questions, I think as we talk about integration is so important. So there are different milestones within integration. There are different work streams, but in your opinion, what are the critical milestones for integration? what are the critical function area like business function and maybe your global function? What are the key and when? What are the important milestones for integration in your opinion? You got the question right? So my question is more about, if you look at integration journey is quite long. But what is the most critical when you start, in between, and at the end?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I can get started. So I think, again, it goes back to what your deal rationale, the key reason for doing the deal. I think that goes back to that. That's where the priority starts with. So let's say you've acquired a technology company, and so integrating that technology with your existing products is key. That is where you would start. That is where you would focus on in the first 30 days, activating or integrating those technology teams, understanding, or let's say if it is the products, if it's either the customers, you're trying to sell your products to their customers. So bringing together the sales force becomes the priority. So training them and things like that. So it is important there will be a lot of decisions to be made in terms of which products, what brands to keep, etc. So instead of being deadlocked by the optimizing the best way, I think it's important to get started with the process, start the training and get going, because there are a lot of interdependencies between various teams, right? So it is important to not get stuck because of those, but just keep moving in the right direction. So I think, again, the first priority is always what the key rationale for the deal is. That is where you would start with. And then and if it's a public company, then there will be financial reporting requirements. So that becomes a key as well, bringing together, how do you bring together the financials of both the companies and do a consolidated reporting? And then, again, the HR, the people, like, do they need to come on to your benefits? Do we need to integrate the 401k? And what are the constraints, requirements, and those kind of things? Taking care of the people aspect of it. So, and then there is IT systems. Those always take longer because you need to understand the systems of both the companies, then pick which one is more applicable or best for both. So those probably take a much longer time, but it is important at least to have those discussions going and involve both the teams, so that everyone together identifies what works best for the overall company.
Yeah, I agree. You have to start with that deal strategy. And for that initial phase of all the integration activities, we make sure we're aligning that communications plan. So when are the employees finding out? When are the clients finding out? When is the market finding out? Because those drive so much of what the necessary nitty-gritty contracts that need to happen, notifications that need to happen, as well as risks. As soon as you make it public, your competitors are going to be out there trying to tell a different story. So getting ahead of all of that and kind of anticipating what reaction's going to be is, it has to align with that communications plan.
Oh, exactly. And that's why this time between signing and closing, because especially lots of deals are now happening in the auction environment. So, and perhaps until the very last moment, you don't know whether you're going to get this asset or not. Of course, like when you work one-on-one with the company and you have exclusivity, it's much more comfortable environment for us as an acquirer, right? But we're finding ourselves a lot of time in the auction environment where we don't necessarily know until the very last moment whether the deal will happen or not. And it's important to cover all these points and have a communication plan and anticipate all of these reactions, basically in a situation when you don't even know whether you're going to get the deal or not, right? And your internal teams may be a little bit reluctant to put like as much effort as required in order to get to the necessary level. So, but that becomes very important work in the event if you get an asset, and if you don't, obviously this work and this planning can be leveraged for the next deal if the company is very acquisitive. And then again, like it's all driven by the investment thesis and by the strategy of an acquisition, and also by the requirements that kind of like needs to be addressed anyway, right? So like let's say financial reporting, right? So it needs to happen regardless. Or IT systems, actually, like I've seen both approaches. Like sometimes IT systems get evaluated and companies trying to harmonize, and sometimes other companies feel it's a large investment to do a harmonization, and perhaps there are ways to make multiple ERPs work and sort of like speak to each other, right? So like there are multiple kind of like ways to approach it. Depends on the size of the acquired entity, and also depends on the previous experience, how it's been done for previous deals, and whether it works or not. So I guess I like to kind of like bring another point, that it's always very important, especially for corporate development team who tends to move from deal to deal to deal. It's always very important to have those learning sessions and to look back and to understand what happened with the deal, right? Like a year or 2 years or 3 years, and to stay connected with the integration team, and to stay connected with all of the reviews that happens after the deal is closed. So if anything else, just for the learning purposes, so to see like, okay, so this is what we thought, and here is what actually happened, and how we can perhaps improve or to bring this learning to the next deal.
So my next question is, so if you look at M&A integration, it's a big change management plan, right? Starting from the day you start thinking of doing a deal, when we close and when we think about integration, this entire process is a big change management plan. So what do you think about this process to manage, when to incorporate this change, how long this process goes on? Rekha, you will take first. So how we manage the change management program, because for me, this is, integration is always the biggest change management. And I have seen some of the, large integration where we had change manager, and he is driving overall change management across the stream till integration is fully completed. So in your opinion, I would like to know your comments, how you manage when you incorporate those change management programs, who are the key people who manage this?
Yeah, I think, Dharmendra, we have talked about like some of this as how communication being the key, and identifying all the stakeholders, both internal and external, that Tatyana mentioned. So how do we communicate not just internally to employees, but externally to customers, to different like shareholders, to the market, and all of that. So, but if we are specifically like talking about change management, like internally, communicating to the employees becomes the key. And it's, I think for bigger integrations, probably you have a separate change management team, but otherwise it's the kind of falls on the IMO team, the integration management team, to kind of do the communication in connection with along with the marketing department and the HR department.
But if your question is when it needs to be considered, it's probably, it doesn't happen often, but it's probably the best practice to start considering change management and integration issues, even in pre-LOI stage. Right. So as we are developing our initial, we've been speaking today a lot about like looking on investment theses, right? So, and when we develop investment theses, we kind of like tend to look a lot on the strategy and strategic rationale and what this acquisition will help us to achieve. Right. But as we look on strategic rationale, we also need to consider what would it take to get to execution of the strategic rationale. So, and it's very helpful to think about what would it take to integrate, and how would we run this target in the event if we were to acquire, even at pre-LOI stage, which, like maybe a little bit early, and maybe you not always have time to think about it because again, you're pressed by auction environment or whatever it might be. But still, it's very important, and not simply to say that, okay, I plug in like 5% of my purchase price as an integration cost, right? But to really think through, maybe even like for half a day, right? Like to have a little workshop with the management, with the champion of the acquisition, to understand that, okay, like what would it take for us to integrate this company, and what are the initial thoughts, and how we would drive this change management, and what's important to preserve, what's important to change, and how would we move forward, and make your executive management aware as well as you're looking for approval for LOIs, etc., right? So that everyone is on the same page and understands what would it take to integrate an asset in case if it's acquired.
Okay, so I have my last question to all of you, and this is again related to integration. So I have seen that whenever we have to set up an integration team, it's always a big firefight, getting people, whether these people are right skill set to do the integration. Many times I have seen the people who are joining integration team, they have no prior experience of any, deal integration. So in your opinion, maybe 1 or 2 points you can, mention how you set up your integration team. If you have set up a large complex integration team, what are the key points you need in your integration team members? Some of the skills.
So I probably have the smallest deal size, I think, of this group. And so I have no integration team. But I think it's kind of like engaging with the functional leads early on, helping them identify people, providing them tools, providing them kind of resources, making sure you're bringing them together as a team. And then you kind of have those external players that can jump in for critical areas, especially when it comes to HR. Knowing people who can cover different markets that are external advisors, people you've worked with, whether it be operations diligence or financial, tax, et cetera, making sure you kind of have people to fill the gaps, because realizing everyone's really busy.
And I guess it's always probably the easiest thing is to use the same functional leads who done diligence to move them along sort of into an integration team, right? Because they already have done their diligence, they understand how an acquired company operates, and they obviously understand how an acquirer operates, right? So it's always, I would say that probably the chances of success are higher if the same functional leads who've been doing diligence are moving along and become members of an integration team.
Yeah, definitely. So I think again it goes back to what is the key integration theme. If it's more on the operations side, probably involving your operations head, and if it's more on the technology side, bringing in more people from the technology team. So that is probably how I would focus on picking an integration team. And I think it's always helpful to also bring in some external consultants who have specialization in that particular sector within the industry to look at points that we internally may not have thought of. So it's an area both during due diligence and integration, I've seen helpful to bring some specialists in the area that could assist as well.
Yeah, so it's a very important point. So I think these are the key skills to have, and I think some of the deal where I work, I've seen these are the big challenges. But I think early, we used to take some of the guys who are already involved with due diligence process to part of integration team, so process was quite faster. So now I come to end of the question. Now I have no more question to ask. Now maybe we have some questions from audience, and I hand over to Akanksha again.
Yeah.
Akanksha,
So
over to
really,
you now.
yeah, so really great insights from all our guest speakers. So there is this question from the audience. It's for Dawn. So the question is that, do you think your benchmark of approximately a year for acquired employees has changed in the face of the Great Resignation?
Yeah, a lot of questions about that. I think there's the consideration is extra attention, obviously, on the employees and during the transition, and even thinking ahead. I would say probably, wages are going up and people have a lot more options. So you kind of have to build in a lot more when it comes to, in the professional services, signing bonuses, retention bonuses, making sure you give the extra care, but you also are kind of probably paying extra economics as well, if it's a key part of your business.
Thank you, Dawn. And thank you very much for being on the panel and for this very interesting and thoughtful discussion, Dawn, Tatyana, and Rekha. Thanks a ton, Dharmendra, for moderating the panel. It was an absolute pleasure to have you all among us. I would also like to thank our audience for listening in and watching our webinar. We hope that you found this webinar informational and insightful and found value in hearing from such a diverse set of industry experts and thought leaders. Thanks again for joining and have a great day ahead.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Akansha.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you for having us.